Good morning. It is 5:25 a.m. on Sunday, October 28th, 2018. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just got up and this is 5 more minutes. In about an hour, I'm leaving for the airport to travel to South Korea for work. So that's a thing and I'm excited by it, and that's why I'm up so early on a Sunday morning. But before that, it's Sunday, and it's time to not just continue, but to complete my rewatch of The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya with the movie The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya. So, obviously, because this is a movie, and not just a full-size movie, but a long one, it's 2 hours and 42 minutes long, I won't be having time to get into the play-by-play of every single plot point the way that I sometimes have when I'm reviewing but a single 25-minute episode. So, on that sense, I'll have to be moving through some of the big plot points relatively quickly. But in another sense, that's easier than it might seem like it would be, because this movie is, shall we say generously, leisurely paced. Now, that's not actually 100% a criticism on my part, because I actually really like it, but it is slow paced for sure. There are moments of real excitement in it, but there's also a lot of talking and waiting, and things don't happen very quickly. It's actually very dreamily paced in a way, which is a little bit more abstract a description, but I feel like is apt nonetheless. And so, what is the plot of the dreamily paced Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya? Well, we pick things up in December. We are told by Kyone's narration that it is about a month after the culture festival. The weather is cold, and as Kyon gets to school, he discovers that Haruhi's latest scheme is to be holding a big Christmas party in their club room, complete with decorations, and also planning to cook a hot pot meal in the room, even though technically that's not allowed because of no open flames allowed in that building, but she plans to do it anyway. And so, there's decorations and plans, and Haruhi comments on how weird it is to celebrate Jesus' birthday but not Muhammad's or Buddha's or whoever. And obviously we've got some just, cultural stuff there in terms of, it's early in the morning, I'm not thinking of the right word, secular celebration of Christmas. But in the meantime, we have Kyon plugging along as normal, doing his same thing where he actually does observe what could be described as a little bit of progress with Haruhi, in the sense that before announcing the Christmas party, she does actually ask each member of the club if they might already have plans or not. And none of them do. And so the party is happening. And she, especially with Kyon, pretty much just assumes that he won't have any, but does technically ask. And so, hey, that's some progress, right? But yeah, so Kyon is, grumbling along in his typical way. He's sent to order more, buy more decorations, and then this is all happening December 17th, and so the next day is December 18th. And so December 18th, Kyon wakes up, and things are a little different. Increasingly, a lot different. And what we, of course, discover is somehow The world has changed in a way that nobody knows Haruhi Suzumiya. She's not a student at his school, and it seems to be an alternate timeline entirely. And there's some weird details, like just the fact that a really severe cold has been going around. I thought when I first watched this that it was going to make more of that, like somehow there were natural disasters and diseases and stuff that perhaps Haruhi was changing and keeping away because of her powers. And I think that still might be the implication, but they don't really develop that plot point. But certainly the world seems a bit drearier. In addition to Kyon's very reasonable upset at finding that the entire world has changed around him, that nobody, including his friends, seem to remember the things he remembers, and then also the fact that Ryoko Asakura, who we haven't seen in the show for a while, but you may recall is the pretty popular girl who tried to kill him with a knife, because it turned out that she was actually sort of a compatriot of Yuki's, and was thus eliminated by Yuki Nagato when, after attempting to kill Kyon. And so she's back, doesn't seem to know anything about what's going on. He's obviously very suspicious of her, and nobody knows who Haruhi is. And he goes to try to find Mikuru, and she doesn't recognize him. Mikuru and Miss Tsuruya are there, and in Kyon's frustration, he gets kind of aggressive and pushy and familiar, to the point where he really angers them. And then he goes to the club room, and Yuki not only seems not to know him, but also is not really acting like herself. She's acting more like a timid, real person, not the Yuki we know. And I think in both the confrontation with Mikuru and the confrontation with Yuki here, there are moments where we feel like Kyon is going too far, to the point where he's really scaring them. But to be fair to Kyon here, he thinks that the entire world has just changed around him, and he is trying to make sure nobody's just playing a trick on him. And I think that is actually somewhat reasonable, and he does apologize in both instances. And so, in any event, Kyon is stumped, right? He does not know what's going on. Nobody seems to understand what's happening. And let's see, I'm just trying to make sure I'm capturing all of the the big points. So he does, of course, he goes home, and he has the cat, which is an interesting detail, right? Because it seems like, how does he have the cat if none of that was real? And his little sister says, you just brought him home one day. So but the cat does not seem to want to talk. And so in all of this, we are definitely also treated to kind of the new Yuki, right? Who is extremely shy and borderline nonverbal, but also seemingly, once she gets over being frightened of Kyon's outburst, seems genuinely interested in, she's all by herself there in the literary club, and maybe would Kyon like to join? And we're definitely, seeing a lot of indications like she might have a crush on him and wants him to join the club with her. And so, in the meantime, she's the only one that he has been, of his, former allies, that is not, this kind of tolerating his behavior at the moment, because, even his other friends, everyone's just worried that he has a severe fever and everything. And, he's pretty, up in arms about this. He is, I think in a lot of stories of this type, you have you have people like, oh, I can't let anybody know that I'm acting weird, and thus they don't do a lot of these sorts of confrontations. But in this one, I think it's kind of more realistic that someone would do those things. Especially just given Kyon's experience of the supernatural is usually something that needs to be aggressively confronted as opposed to quietly sneaked around. But let's see. Yeah, so I guess probably the next big plot. Oh, one of the other things, I guess, this is a higher level sort of topic, but obviously this story is in some ways a retelling, or it's a reflection on, inspired by, an homage to It's a Wonderful Life, the old classic Capra movie with Jimmy Stewart, just in the context of presenting Kyon with a world where, in this case, instead of himself being never born, but a world where Haruhi Suzumiya never entered his life. And then I feel like the story does a lot of really interesting things with that. I mean, the fact that it's all set at Christmas is not a coincidence. And I think there's some interesting stuff going on with that. But just so keeping that in mind as we sort of proceed here is that, Kyon is starting to, he doesn't know what else to do. He's run out of things that he knows how to do or try or ask about, but he's still compelled to go back to the club room the next day. And as he's looking around, trying to just think, sort of almost aimlessly searching for clues at this point, he finds The Fall of Hyperion, which was, of course, the book that Yuki gave him way back in the original arc of the series, the one that had the bookmark where she invited him to meet her at the park, and then where she told him she was an alien. So that book being there seems significant. And then sure enough, there is a bookmark in it that says program run condition, collect the keys, deadline 2 days later. And it's like, great. What are the keys? Also concerned that, is it 2 days after he finds the bookmark? Or how long has it been there? It's like, So, but at the very least, this for Kyon is the first confirmation that he's not just crazy, right? That something is happening that has made this happen. And so that's a big development for him, of course. But he doesn't know what to do about it. And so he ends up going to visit Yuki's apartment. And it's different than the last time he was there. It's much more like an actual human being. Yuki lives there. And, and we discover that this version of Yuki does have one memory of him, having met him before. And of note, it is the incident that really happened at the library where she was there and wanted to stay, but they couldn't, so Kyon got a library card for her. And in this Yuki's version of the story, there's no Haruhi there. They were strangers until Kyon helped her get the library card, but she really remembered it and was grateful, which is nice, but it's an interesting note. It's an interesting clue here to us that something is afoot here, because how could that event have happened without Haruhi's involved? Is it really coincidence? That seems very unlikely. But why would she have a different version of that memory? So that's the inconsistency. Like, if this was an entirely separate timeline, how could she have that memory at all? And yet, if she has it, why is it different? So, we don't know. But, Asakura comes again, and because, of course, she lived in the same apartment building. and she apparently takes care of Yuki by cooking for her sometimes, and that's nice. And it's one of those things where this version of Ryoko, is doting on Yuki and protecting her and everything, and and that of course is comes up later in terms of when Ryoko shows up again towards the end. That she's designed to protect Yuki, take care of her. In any event, we get, oh, sorry, I'm blowing my nose a little bit. We get more significant clues towards the idea that Yuki is definitely crushing on Kyon in this sequence, to the point where she's, she kind of weakly grabs the corner of his jacket and tries to get him to stay. So, Kyon stays out, even though it's awkward with Ryoko Asakura there. But in any event, he knows he has this bookmark. He knows he wants to find the keys, but what keys, where, he still doesn't know what to do. He's stuck still. And that's when we have sort of the clever wheels of the plot turning. So where Taniguchi, who had been sick and therefore not present for a little while, is back in class, and they're discussing Kyon's strange outburst the day before, and that's when it's revealed Taniguchi does know her. And we remember from the beginning of the show, he is the one that went to junior high with her and told Kyon about this weird girl and how weird she was. And so he knows the name and is able to tell Kyon, yes, Haruhi Suzumiya exists. This is not a world without her. It's just a world where she didn't come to this school. She goes to another school. And so that obviously is this big breakthrough for Kyon, and he calls Taniguchi an octopus bastard, which is a weird insult, but whatever. And there's probably some cultural relevance to that I'm not aware of. But in any event, he rushes over to this other school. And it's awkward, too, because he has to wait. See, this is another, actually, just as a brief tangent, this is a perfect example of why this movie is slow. Is that instead of just cutting to him arriving at the school with them coming out, we get this whole sequence of, oh, it's too early, and he has to explain why it's actually too early, and then he has to note that if it was Haruhi, he would probably just break in, but he shouldn't, and because there's a security guard, and so he'll go wait and wait and wait. Oh, and there she is, and it's like, that whole little bit probably didn't really need to be there, but that's fine. Anyway, I'm not really complaining. It's as much as just observing that that's why it feels so slow-paced. That sort of thing. But in any event, turns out Haruhi's there, but also Koizumi, and so that's a surprise. And also but they still don't know him. And it almost goes disastrously because he confronts her as though she will know him. She doesn't. And then so he looks like a crazy person. She's going to leave. There's a policeman there and everything. But what he yells out is, remember the Star Festival 3 years ago. And we know, having just recently rewatched the episode Bamboo Leaf Rhapsody, that Kyon had gone back in time to help her paint those letters, and it would appear that happened in this universe too. She remembers that. And she didn't recognize him as the person until he says that it's him, with the code name he gave her at the time, John Smith. And so we get a really interesting sequence where, Kyon even comments on it when he first sees Haruhi, that, she's got the longer hair like she did at the very beginning of the series, and she acts kind of more withdrawn and a little depressed like she did at the beginning of the series. And so we see that, but then we also see, as he sits there in the cafe with Koizumi and Haruhi and explaining everything from his perspective, leaving nothing out, Not only does she believe him, but she's excited. She says, that sounds amazing. She's interested. She wants to engage with this fully, to the point where she pretty much takes charge in typical Haruhi fashion and demands that they're all going to go to the clubroom. She wants to see it for herself. And there's a little bit of discussion of like, what version of altered timeline is this? Is it a totally parallel dimension? Is it a change to the existing one? And I think later we are actually given confirmation that it's a change to the existing one, that he has to then go back to the moment in which it was changed in order to fix it. But that's a little bit later. So he shows up there. He goes with this new Haruhi and Koizumi back to the club room. She's pretty much takes over, and we see how relieved he is, and he even says so to, it's like, oh, I missed Haruhi. I missed this. And so they're going to the club room. There's a fun moment where before they get there, she says, wait, we have to go capture Miss Asahina first. And then just that use of the word. And there's some great stuff, like, the ongoing running gag of Haruhi's treatment of Mikuru is sometimes funnier than others, but this one was pretty funny. Just this moment of Haruhi declaring that she's with the school intelligence service, and basically like, you're coming with me, like Mikuru is being arrested, and this reveal, this slow motion reveal of Mikuru's gradually changing expressions from like surprised and a little confused to, wait, what's going on? Like, oh no. and then it's sort of a brief repeat of the moment when Mikuru was first brought to the clubroom in the other timeline. And having assembled the whole crew now, we realize with Kion that those were the keys referred to by the bookmark. Was to have everybody there. And so sure enough, the computer activates. It's Yuki talking to him through the computer as she has before, telling him there's an emergency escape program. You only have one chance. You can either choose to run it, and the outcome is not guaranteed, or you can just stay here as it is. And it's interesting here because, and Kion reflects on it a little bit, of he's always talked about how great it would be if he didn't have Haruhi dragging him around on all these crazy adventures all the time. And now he's sort of being given a perfect opportunity to say, yeah, I choose the world where I don't have to have that. Or he can choose to try to go back to the way it was. And that's the choice he makes, right? And one of the things that I really like about this movie is that, we've talked, as we talked through the whole series, that an ongoing theme was Kion. This is the lesson he learned at the end of the Sai of Haruhi Suzumiya arc, right? Is this idea that just being a passive observer and complaining about everything all the time is not good. It's being a bad friend. It's being a bad person. And so his decision to be more proactive in that sense, but now we're going to go make that really more concrete and explicit. And so in this moment, we see him kind of impulsively, he thinks on it a little bit, he chooses that, and there's a moment where he realizes he kind of has to say goodbye to this version of Yuki, who is clearly upset by it. But, he is also saying, I can't join the literary club because I'm already a member of something. I'm the first member of the SOS Brigade. And that's kind of fun there. But I like that the story is not ready to let him off the hook yet. Because this could be still kind of an impulsive sort of like, he's still just trying to figure out what's going on sort of decision. And he's not necessarily fully admitting to himself yet exactly what decision he's making. That will come a bit later. But he engages the program. And then all of a sudden, now he is back in time again. He is now it's hot outside. It's apparently summer. He realizes it's the night of the Star Festival 3 years ago. And he immediately is like, oh, yeah, well, I guess I know what to do now. And so he watches the events of Bamboo Leaf Rhapsody happen from the corner. And as a fan of time travel stories, I love this kind of stuff. I love the part in Back to the Future 2 where Marty gets to watch his Back to the Future 1 self do his Back to the Future 1 things, but from this other perspective, and the implication that if we'd just seen a different camera angle during the first movie, we would have seen another Marty up there. I love that stuff, and so I like it here too. And so Kyon ultimately connects back up with the adult version of Miss Asahina, and gets a bit more info that she's there and aware of something. And I think this is one piece of it that feels a little bit weird, in the sense that, like, if the future is changed, how can she be there? But it's, it can be a little bit hand wavy, because of course this is a moment in the past that would be different if she hadn't arrived, and so I guess it makes sense that she had to be there. But then how does that jive with the future being changed later? Hard to say. But in any event, the two of them then go to see this time's version of Yuki, who is back to the version of herself that Kyon is familiar with. And in particular, this is happening only moments after she put the young version of Mikuru and the older version, the previous version of Kyon in the bedroom in time stop mode. And so once again, he's sitting in there realizing that another version of himself is now just asleep in the bedroom. And here's where we have, some more reveals. And of course, briefly, there's a moment, again, this is just a matter of the story being stretched out so much for this pace of the movie. Like, there doesn't seem to me to really be any need to hide from the audience the identity of who changed the universe, especially when what's happening is that our point of view character is learning it. So what is the point of telling the main character but hiding it from the audience, only to then reveal it to the audience minutes later in the show? I don't know. I feel like they could have just said it in the moment and not tried to hide it. That seemed like it was a little too clever for its own good. It's not a big deal, but still. But so ultimately, what is revealed over the next few minutes here is that, the specific nature of what was changed and how, the reveal that it was not Haruhi who did it, which is kind of amazing. It was in fact Yuki sort of hijacking Haruhi's power. And so, with Kyon wanting to change it back, which is also what Mikuru and Yuki want, this version of Yuki, and so he's given like a little hypodermic gun that shoots little needles, and told that he's going to have to wait until the universe changes, but then immediately after inject Yuki, that version of Yuki, and so we time travel back to that moment, which is the morning of December 18th, which is, of course, the day that all this started, right? And we see the moment where Yuki changes the universe. And it's really a lovely moment, actually, where Yuki just kind of is waving her hands in the air like this, and we see this storm building in the sky around her like she's conducting it, and it's actually just really kind of a nice little sequence there. It doesn't take very long, but it's pretty cool. And so once she changes it, she's back to the very timid, shy version, and so she's frightened when confronted with this hypodermic needle gun and a crazy person. But we also get a sequence here where Kyon puts himself, metaphorically speaking, through his mirror reflection, to the task of having to just really say out loud and admit out loud, it's like, why are you working so hard to change it? Like, you're going to a lot of effort to change the world back to something you complained about all the time. Why is that? Don't just do it unknowingly. Don't do it unthinking. Don't do it because you feel like you're supposed to. Why? You get to make the choice here. The choice is yours. Why are you choosing to put it back to the way that you complained about all the time? And of course, he basically forces himself to admit, of course I liked it. I liked it. It was fun. I liked it that way. And I want it to be like that again. I like that better than this so-called normal world without it. Without Haruhi and without her crazy antics. And it's this amazing catharsis moment, because that's been this theme throughout the series. And for this main character to actually undergo real personal growth in a way where the show not only makes him do it, but forces him to really actually own up to it and not just sort of casually do it, which is great. And so he has made the decision to do it, and he's gonna inject Yuki, but that's when, oh my god, Ryoko Asakura shows up with her knife again, and she stabs him, and all of a sudden he's bleeding to death, and oh my god, what the... And so the implication that, so in her malfunctioning state, that was the reason that Yuki did this, is that she's malfunctioning, errors accumulated, and Kyon comes to the conclusion that what that really means is, she was having feelings. And I guess I don't want to brush past that, because that's also significant, because in addition to Kyon's growth here, we get some real stuff from, nice stuff from Yuki as well, where he's recognizing also that he's been taking her for granted, right? All these amazing things that she can do, all the things that she had to endure, for example, during the Endless Eight, all of these things, and yet he had come to just sort of rely on her as being like, if anything really dangerous happened, she could take care of it. And to recognize that she's, does have her own emotions and needs, under that, seemingly placid exterior. And so in any event, Kyon is stabbed. He seems like he's dying. He has not managed to reset the timeline. So what's going on? And then, of course, Ryoko is prevented from finishing him off by another Yuki Nagato. And then there's another Mikuru there. And it's all kind of crazy. And then there is a mysterious figure who is obviously Kyon himself, talking about, don't worry about it, we'll take it from here. Yes, I know that hurts, it hurt for me too. And then Kyon wakes up in the hospital. And, so all of that stuff, this being, well, I'll come to that. But so he wakes up in the hospital, and we're immediately thinking, like, is he waking up in the hospital from a stab wound? No. According to Koizumi, who's there, he's waking up because on the afternoon of December 18th, he fell down the stairs and hit his head and has been unconscious for 3 days. And so now it's the 21st. And the SOS brigade has been waiting, for him to wake up in shifts, along with his family. And we learn too that Haruhi wasn't taking part in the shifts. She was just there. She was sleeping now in the sleeping bag. And there's a moment where what is supposed to be very sweet, and it still is kind of, like when he's looking down at her sleeping body, and he kind of brushes some hair off her forehead, and then a little more, and then rubs his thumb along her lips, and then caresses her cheek, and then we're starting to go like, okay, this is getting a little bit weird now. But sure enough, she wakes up and is right back to her typical behavior of, like, if you're going to wake up, you should wake up when I tell you to wake up. And assumes that he scribbled on her face, which he did consider. And he is, so not only is it a demonstration, first of all, of her commitment and how much she was really concerned for him and worried for him, and which we could have guessed, but it is demonstrated through her actions, right? But is also, it's like, once she's back to her old ways, it's like, oh yes. And then Mikuru shows up and she's emotional, and it's just it's the ending of It's a Wonderful Life, right? Where it's like he's back to wherever I want to live again. I want to live again. And so he's back and everything's okay and it's nice. And so, we finish then with he goes and he talks to Yuki again, where they discuss that, first of all, that he's glad to be back, and that she mentions how, because that whole thing was very dangerous and it was obviously her fault, that the thought entity is considering punishing her. And this is where we get a really great moment too, where Kyon makes clear his affection for her and his intention to stand beside her if anyone's going to try to judge her, and to say, you tell the thought entity that if anything happens to you, if you disappear or anything, I'll tell Haruhi to remake the universe to eliminate the thought entity. So it's basically, he's like, no, you're staying right here with us, and if they try to do anything, we'll hold the universe at stake. And it's just this great moment, and and then we get the what was a toss away line of like, are you stand with someone in the dead of night when the rain turns to snow, and that happens here, and it's very sweet. And the one slightly weird element of this, although I guess it's typical of this genre of anime, is that the show kind of tries to, it gives us sort of the clues of a happy romantic ending for all three girls. like he has deepened his connection with all three of them, and it's kind of indicated a little bit in all three, like there's at least the potential for romantic growth there, but he's not really committed to any of them. It's a little bit like a dating simulator before you really commit to someone. But in any event, it's becomes Christmas Eve, and Kyon is reflecting on how, because of what he saw as he lay there bleeding out when he was stabbed, he knows that, well, he's not really done yet, because at some point they have to go back in time for him to be the other Kyon, for them to actually do the reset, or else it won't have happened, which is confusing, but it's like, okay, yeah, I guess that's what has to happen. And so for him to be thinking on it like that, is this idea of this crazy adventure, this thing that he's going to have to do, is the sort of thing he would have before groaned about. And in this case, it's like, well, we're going to have to do that, but you know what? For now, let's go to Haruhi's Christmas party. That sounds like fun. And it's a very nice ending. And then we get one last little coda after the credits, where we see Yuki at the library, and she observes a little boy helping another little girl get a library card. And there's a moment where she's watching that, and we see her put the book up to cover her mouth, which suggests, without actually showing, that she's covering a smile. A smile of the type that we saw just once when she was her human version of herself, and it was considered notable at the time. So in any event, that's the movie. And so, considered as an overall story, we have, it's an ongoing story. We've not reached a conclusion for these characters and their adventures together. There's implications that they have at least one more and maybe several more. The adult version of Mikuru tells Kyon that, one day you'll look back on these times nostalgically, which suggests they all still kind of know each other further in the future. And so it has this sort of hopeful thing, and we've now had Kyon really forced to confront the fact that he does like this. He does want to be part of it, and that's really great. And we also get more depth from Yuki, which is great. Um, it's I really like this movie. I mean, it's slow paced, as I said, but I love the story, and I love how it sort of concludes the overall series, at least to date. Now, they have made another series called The Disappearance of Nagato Yuki-chan, which should be noted. My understanding it is that it's not actually canon within the main universe here. It's sort of like an alternate universe set during this time, changed timeline where Yuki is just a normal girl. I'm not going to be watching that for this rewatch because it's not canon. But if anyone's just dying for more Haruhi content, you could probably check that out. But in any event, that wraps the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya rewatch. And now I have to finish packing and get ready to go to the airport. So I'll talk to you all tomorrow for 5 more minutes from Korea.